All right. Hey, everybody. My name's William. This is my wife, Jul. Welcome to the podcast. We're going to be answering your questions that you've sent in, that you've texted in on marriage, dating, parenting, all things relationship.
All the things, yes.
To start off, I just want to share everybody a little bit about us.
Yeah, so William and I have, we dated in high school, and we kind of met at the end of high school, dated long distance for about 4 years while we were in college. And then we've been married since for about 19 years together.
19.
Married
15.
for 15, together for 19.
Yeah.
We now have 3 boys under the age of 9. We balance 2 careers. I am back in school. We do sports and extended family and all of the things. So pretty busy, but exciting.
Yeah. So we've been in ministry, since when we were dating. We started dating when I was at Bible college, and so that's always been a huge part of our life. And then Jewel graduated from Florida State Nursing School, and now is back getting her doctorate in nursing. So busy life, but it's a huge blessing what we get to walk through. So, and for us, we are really passionate about marriage, about families, about parenting. We really feel like we've learned a lot. We've had a lot of great examples in front of us and learned a lot of hard lessons along the way as well. So, as we've been preparing for this marriage series and, been praying about it, man, this is something that was kind of brought up that we're like, man, we love to answer questions, knowing in this series, there's some big principles that are being talked about, but there's always like specific questions that people have. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
So in what we've seen, we have been guilty of ourselves is, it's easy to have friends that you joke about with all the life craziness, but the things that are hard and challenges for us and what we see with friends and couples and families is that, we tend not to talk about that and not to share and not to ask questions, not to ask for help when we're struggling. We know now that the divorce rate is higher for people in their 20s than ever before, than in, the traditionally 50s, 60s, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to, building a solid foundation now and working on these things now. So we really want to share that. We want to be open and go through these questions together and let it help.
Yeah, exactly. And if we're prioritizing our marriages and our kids and our families, like that impacts everything else. And so if you prioritize it, it impacts it in a good way. If you don't prioritize it, it impacts it in a bad way. So we felt like the best way to lead our church and our community is to help answer some questions. So why don't we jump in? The first question that we got was, what are wise ways to prepare your marriage for parenthood?
Big question. Like anything, if you wait until you think you're fully prepared,
is that a thing?
You will never be fully prepared. We know that. So understanding that, but keeping in mind that there are certainly better times to undergo becoming parents, than not. So we certainly wouldn't recommend, any family, any couple going through some big life challenges, right? A death in the family, some financial crisis, things that really take a lot of our emotion, time, and energy. We would say that might not be the most opportune time.
Or your marriage is struggling and you're like, oh, let's throw a kid in the mix.
Right. And as silly as that sounds, there are a lot of couples guilty of that.
Sure.
And it's easy to do that and think that that is the answer. But as we can tell you, that only makes things more difficult. And your foundation has to be solid in order to successfully, enter parenthood. So certainly not, you're never going to be fully prepared, right? But waiting to a time that you guys have been able to establish a good relationship and a good marriage, and you feel like you have, talked about it and you're ready to take that step.
Sure. I know for us, we were married for 5-ish, 6 years before we had Liam. And there's pros and cons to waiting or not. Like for us, that was we had time together before we kind of entered into this next phase. And I'd say, so the best way to prepare is something I think we learned from this mistake is knowing, be prepared to know that life is going to change and life is going to be different. We got to have this mindset that like, man, this kid is entering our world, which is in some ways 100% true, right? The other side of that is, man, this kid is going to rock your world and it is going to flip it upside down. And all of a sudden, man, you have this, this whole nother human that like takes priority. And so I think as you're preparing for parenthood, as you're, preparing for, what's ahead, it's taking that moment to say, okay, things are going to look different. I don't know how they're going to look different, but let's talk about it and make sure we understand that like, hey, you might not be able to go tailgate for 5 hours before a football game when we have a newborn.
That's a reality.
That's real life.
Yeah. No, for sure. That's a great piece of advice. One thing, some tangible ways, I think one of the best things that intentionally at times, unintentionally at other times, we did was kind of seek a friendship of a couple, of family that's 5 to 10 years ahead of you in life. Not necessarily age, obviously that differs, but stage of life. So, for us, when we were dating and into our first couple of years of marriage, we had friends who had a couple of kids. We used to, babysit them and hang out with them and things like that. And we really got to see firsthand what life looked like as two working parents, balancing kids and whatever. And beyond just seeing that example, but having somebody that can kind of speak some encouragement and some words of advice into you, some mentorship. I think the tendency for a lot of young couples entering parenthood is you're just saturated with friends in your same stage of life, going through the same thing, which is so great. You need friends and people to go through, like we did, life, as it's happening.
Sure.
But there's a lot of value to having some mentorship older to seek advice and to seek help and to kind of see how they do it. So I think that's incredibly valuable.
Oh, yeah, totally. And a thing I heard recently that I think is so important for parents and for all of us, like parents constantly have to be learning. We constantly have to be learning, for, like I said, early on we had those examples. Now we have those examples. Our boys are 3, 6, and 9, and we have friends that their kids are in middle school or in high school, and we're saying, hey, what's it like? What are you kind of walking through? And just learning from them, and kind of what that is. So I think that's vital. I'd say one piece of advice I give every new dad or a husband that's about to become a dad is this, that, man, you're about to, especially early on, you're about to share your spouse, you're about to share your wife for the first time. This was like a big shock to my system, right? Where we have been married, we dated for 4 years, we've been married for another 5 years before we had a kid. And so we had traveled a bunch, done a bunch of different things. And all of a sudden, Liam's kind of dropped in our lap. And for you, like, you grew him inside of you. And for me, I'm like, oh, this is cool. This is awesome. I'm about to be a dad. And then
he just showed up one day.
He just showed up and it was almost passed out. But as, he's there and I'm like, oh man, like he needs you so, especially those early days, early months, so much. And there was this, like the reality is there was this natural, like kind of jealousy that was kind of built up.
Sure.
And I'm like, what's wrong with me? And so talking to dads and, husbands, like, man, that's normal. And like, you work past that. Like that's something in that brief season that like, you work past and you recognize, okay, the best thing I can do for my wife and for my son is to love them, to be there for them, and to share my wife with my son. Yeah, sure.
Very good. Okay, moving on to our next question. How do you keep intimacy in your marriage after becoming parents?
Good one. Yeah. Man, preface it with this. The best thing you can do for your kids and for your family is to prioritize your marriage. Prioritize your marriage and to have a healthy marriage. A big part of having a healthy marriage is to have a healthy sex life. And that is through your entire marriage, right? That's not in this season or that season or whatever. Like prioritizing what it means to have a healthy marriage and have a healthy sex life. And so I think that's kind of like the starting point of like,
yeah. So people are like, okay, well, how do you gauge if you have a healthy sex life, right? You'll hear William and I talk a lot, throughout this podcast series about assumptions and expectations. So a question that we kind of like to phrase to couples is, how do you gauge it? If someone was to ask your spouse, hey, do you have a healthy sex life, or do you think that you have a healthy sex life?
Sure.
What would their answer be, right? So it's knowing if you're even on the same page to start, right? Prior to parenthood.
Sure.
But certainly, getting into parenthood, growing your family and things like that. So kind of a baseline question and a thought process for each other is to, hey, where are you guys at now?
Yeah. And I would say throughout the whole process, it's talking about your needs, talking about your expectations, talking about, what you're feeling, like working through, especially when kids are the equation,
Yes. So assumptions, right?
Yeah.
Assumptions are incredibly detrimental for any successful relationship of any kind. Certainly carries over to your intimacy, to your sex life. So assuming that you know what they're thinking, assuming that they know what you're thinking. I perfect example for us, when we had just become parents, when I, was pregnant, obviously, for the first time in a long time. And some of those first couple months of having a newborn are the most challenging physically, emotionally, all of the things, especially for a mom. And I just assumed that William knew I was always exhausted, right? Exhaustion was
I can read your mind, obviously.
Right. Was your baseline. He knew that I was emotionally drained all the time. And though it may seem obvious to you, it might not be obvious to your spouse. And that's, you want to give them the benefit of the doubt that, hey, they cannot read your mind.
Sure.
So we had to learn from some failures that we had to talk about it.
Yeah.
We had to, like it or not, it's not the most fun conversation, but we had to talk about it and eliminate those assumptions.
Yeah, exactly. And once in that particular instance, once we eliminated the assumptions and we talked about it, talked about how we felt, talked about what I was feeling and what you were feeling, which were totally different. And two totally different, experiences, even though we're living in the same house and just added the kid, right? Even talking about the feelings that are selfish and like acknowledging, I think that's important, like acknowledging, hey, this is how I'm feeling. And honestly, I don't like that I feel like this, but it's honest and it's true. And it allowed both of us to sympathize with each other,
Absolutely.
How we felt, and what we were thinking. And I'll just add this, husbands, intimacy starts outside of the bedroom. Like 100% starts outside of the bedroom, right? Like, how you love and you care for your wife in any season, and how you communicate and how you share, like I said, share how you feel. You're able to hear and receive how she feels. Like that breeds intimacy in the bedroom, And so, like, tip, don't be dumb. It starts outside the bedroom. It starts with communicating, talking about how you feel, hearing how she feels, truly caring for each other.
And absolutely the opposite is true of, women too, and wives too. It's encouraging your spouse, obviously, outside of the bedroom in life, and having those open and honest, communication and times that you talk about that together is absolutely huge. So wives, same challenge to you guys. It's just as important.
Yeah, totally. All right, next question. Can you support your spouse who is in school full time and take care of kids? We're planning kids and are nervous we will be too busy with my spouse in school for 7+ years.
Big question. The short answer is yes.
You can do it.
You can do it. I think really what is being asked here is, can you successfully do it? Yes, but going into it and having an understanding that life is going to look a lot different.
Sure.
that it's going to add some new seasons that are going to constantly change, and, the good and the bad and things like that. And understanding that you both will need to constantly talk about that, support each other in different ways than maybe you have in the past. And knowing that it's going to be different.
Yeah, totally. Obviously, we are walking through this now. Sure. It was probably...
This wasn't our question.
Yeah, we did not plan this question. For us, we were, I guess it was a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, where, Jul was kind of like, man, I really feel like this is kind of the next step in my career. The Lord was just kind of very blatantly opening doors for us for you to go back to school. And so we prayed about it. We kind of like, all right, let's kind of take steps through this. But it was a decision we made together, right? It was a decision that as a couple, we said, okay, we're going to embark on this journey. And as we went into it, knowing we have 3 kids, we just bought a dog for Christmas. I mean, Santa brought a dog for Christmas. And we're like, okay, let's add this to the equation. We had decided as a couple, this is the best thing for our future, so... And so I think in that, it was like saying together, hey, this is a sacrifice for a season. That season might be 3 years, in this case, 7 years. But we know on the back end of that, this is how it's going to best serve our family.
Absolutely. And for us, and really what I see kind of the foundation of this question is, how do you do that? Not can you do it, because you're probably going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
But how do you do it? We are learning this now, right? Like William said, we are constant learners, and we have certainly not learned and experienced everything, but we are realizing that we constantly have to check in with each other.
Yep.
I have to initiate that. He has to initiate that at times.
Yep.
But that, we are constantly checking in, and that every season, what is working right now might not work in a couple months from now, right? Yep. It's going to change, and an element, a variable is now different. So being willing to constantly check in with each other, reevaluate, reassess, see what's working, see what's not, and go from there. It's you can't get into a set, routine and expect that it's going to look that way indefinitely.
Sure. So. Yeah. And like, whether it's school, whether it's a busy work season, whether it's, embarking on a new career path, whatever the case is, realize that you're working as a team, or I'd say figure out how to work as a team.
Sure.
Because at the end of the day, as a couple, as a married couple, you've, as we talked about this past Sunday, right? The two have become one, right? You've left your father and mother, you've become one. Hey, we are a unit. Yep. We're working together. And so as we are two people working as one, man, how can we best accomplish this goal, accomplish this task, whatever it is? And so, for us, that has looked like, hey, I'm going to be picking the kids up more often. I'm going to be communicating, with nannies or with grandparents more than I maybe normally have in the past. Or, but like you said, that may look different this semester compared to next semester. And so again, just open communication, talking about those things, talking about, honestly, like, how are you feeling right now? Like, I know you got a lot going on, with school and prioritizing our marriage and prioritizing our kids. Like, that's a lot to juggle. Like, what do we need to adjust? What do we need to, change? Or you asking me the same things. Hey, what do you need to adjust as far as, time with friends and time with each other, or whatever the case is.
Yeah. So. And just one last thought on that, because again, we are learning this, but there is no commitment that you as a couple or you as a family should take on, that should ever be first place, right? You'd really, truly, constantly need to prioritize your marriage and your family as your first priority. And if those needs aren't getting met, it is your responsibility as a couple to reevaluate, like even with school, your career, no matter what it is, important as it is, nothing is more important, of course, than your marriage, than your family. So just making sure that you don't ever reprioritize your structure with that, I think is huge.
Yeah, totally.
Last question for today. So what are your thoughts on how men and women should approach dating specifically the roles as men and women in initiating a dating relationship?
Yeah. Great question. I'll say this. I believe the Bible teaches us and that God has designed men to be leaders. And I believe that starts in the dating relationship. Man, we as men, like God has placed us to be the leaders of our household and to be, submitting to Christ, and wives being the ones that are like leading alongside of us.
Mm-hmm.
But as men, like we live in a culture that we're too afraid of rejection, right? We're too afraid of failure.
Ooh.
We're too afraid of, trying new things because we think we're going to get rejected, right? We try and we're consistently trying to instill this in our kids, right? Of, little side tangent, of it's okay to fail, right? The only lessons you learn in life are when you fail. And so whether that's trying new sports or trying new things or, going and, riding a skateboard and like busting your knee on the road or whatever it is, right? Like, you don't know until you fail, you know? And so I think in a dating relationship, like, in the dating context, like we see this, we have friends that their boys are in high school, right? And, she was telling us the other week, like kind of the thing that they do is the boy goes and asks the girl's friend, hey, would Jul go to prom with me? And then they would get confirmation she's going to say yes, right? And then they play this big elaborate thing of how they're going to ask them to prom, right? Okay, cute, funny, whatever. Like, I look at that and I'm like, man, you're just afraid to be rejected. Like, you're just scared to be rejected.
Absolutely.
And so men, like if I'm giving advice to like men on dating, one, don't be afraid to be rejected. Put yourself out there. Be respectful. Like be respectful to the women that God's put in your life, right? But don't be afraid to get rejected. And then the other side of that is don't put too much weight in dating, right? There's not too much weight in a date, right? Because when you go on a date with somebody, you're not signing an agreement, you're not entering into a covenant, you're not like, you're not getting married. The point of dating is to know like, hey, is this somebody I want to be with the rest of my life, right? So don't put too much weight into like, being rejected, and don't put too much weight in pursuing somebody in a relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I think as women, we do kind of have a natural desire to want to be pursued, to want to be asked, not asked through a friend and a friend and a friend. And we do, and that's a good thing. I also don't necessarily think it's a bad thing for women to pursue a guy by any means. And what I would say is I feel like in our culture today, we're seeing a bigger shift, right? A shift from men that used to pursue women to women that pursue men. And that's probably for a lot of different reasons.
Sure.
That you kind of were touching on and talking about. But I think the red flag women in that is that you can kind of set yourself up for a relationship that you don't like. Because if you take too much initiative and you are always the one taking initiative and pursuing, that can become a comfortable place for that guy to be. That he is content and fine in that, and that you don't really get, that desire that you have to be pursued and dated back, so to speak, is not there. So I would definitely say that's the danger in that, or the red flag in that. And wanting to be sure that, that's an equal thing and understanding as you go through the dating process with somebody. For sure.
Make your intentions known.
Yep.
But don't be surprised if he didn't pursue you when you're dating. Don't be surprised when he doesn't lead down the road. I can't help but think of the time I asked you to be my girlfriend. You remember that?
I do.
I was in California. You were here. And I remember I was like talking to the guys and like, that I lived with, I'm like, I'm going to ask her, and we get on the phone and it's a phone call. It's late because, we're old. And so like there was
3-hour time difference.
3-hour time difference. And you had to wait till nights and weekends to like have,
I don't even
3
know.
minutes.
Yeah.
Story for another day. But I remember like hanging up the phone and being, classic William. I probably didn't communicate it very well, but I remember getting off the phone and being like, she said no. Like I got rejected. And I walk into the apartment, all the guys are like, oh, how'd it go? And I'm like, dude, she said no. Like, I don't know what happened. Like I totally misread it, And I remember texting you. Remember this? I remember texting you and being like, well, that was awkward. And like you immediately called me. You're like, no, that's not.
I do like you. I just didn't understand your conversation. Something like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
But, for us, like that was a big step for me of just kind of like, I'm putting myself out there. I don't know how this is going to go. Right. And, but it gave me confidence. It gave me like boldness in pursuing it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Great words.
Awesome. Well, that's it for today. Thank you guys for joining us. We're really excited about doing this over the next couple of weeks. And if you have any questions about what we said about from the sermon series or just in general, remember you can text us questions in to 94000.
We would love to hear them. We have loved going through these and just want to continue to do that. So again, if they spark, further questions from today or through this series, share with us.
Yeah.
We want to dive into it.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you guys.
Thank you.